"Rock!" Sasha yelled from the front of the small boat. From the tiller, Caleb squinted against the stinging rain as he tried to decipher the abstract shapes floating past them in the darkness. A sudden flash of lightning revealed a huge stone column jutting out of the rough sea directly ahead. Caleb cut the engine and the boat lurched to a stop as a huge wave crashed against the column, spraying them with foam. Caleb reached for the throttle, but Sasha stopped him. "Listen," she said. It took a moment for Caleb to realize what she was hearing, the distinct sound of waves crashing against rocks. It was coming from all around them. Caleb waited for the next flash of lightning and gunned it straight towards the widest gap he could see. Alaska's Inside Passage was a labyrinth of islands, and he honestly had no idea where they were headed. He just wanted to get out of the rocks. They hadn't gone 20 feet when the boat scraped a rock beneath the waterline, and the motor screamed in protest as the propeller lodged against it. Caleb cut the engine, plunging them back into eerie silence. The boat bobbed awkwardly as the stern remained hung up on the rocks. Caleb tried to find out what they were caught on, but couldn't see anything in the swirling black water. A large swell washed under them, lifting the boat as it passed. It wasn't enough to dislodge them, but the boat came down hard with a hollow crunch that surely cracked the fiberglass hull. Another flash of lightning revealed an approaching wave at least twice as large and cresting just off their bow. They braced themselves as the wave hit. Sasha fared as well as could be expected in the front of the boat, but Caleb took the brunt of it. The sheer force of the wave slammed him against the wall before washing him over the railing. Any pain that Caleb felt paled in comparison to the sudden immersion in icy water. By Alaskan standards, 57 degrees was actually quite warm, but still enough to send an unaccustomed body into shock. Caleb's head rang as he came up, gasping for air. He had just enough mental faculty left to see that the wave had carried him 20 yards from the boat, which was now bobbing freely but half submerged. The rocky shore was at least 5 times further, but it was in the direction of the current. Caleb forced his trembling limbs in the direction of the shore, but as he got close, he could tell that the waves crashing against the rocks were much larger and more violent than he had thought. He felt himself dropping down and touched bottom, but the bigger the trough, the bigger the swell. He turned just in time to see the wave come down on top of him, slamming him underwater, and everything went black. Back in the boat, Sasha managed to regain her balance on the slippery deck, which was now half submerged as the boat sank. She tied off a line and threw it in Caleb's direction, but it wasn't nearly long enough, and Sasha could see that Caleb wasn't moving. Without hesitation, Sasha dove into the water. It was just as cold, but the adrenaline and the conscious decision to jump in helped soften the effects that Caleb had experienced. As the waves helped carry her towards him, she felt a sinking feeling in her gut as she saw that Caleb was indeed unconscious. She grabbed him by the life jacket and held on for dear life as a wave came down on top of them. Sasha tumbled over the seabed but somehow managed to keep hold of Caleb. When she came up, it was shallow enough to stand, and she realized that they were on a sandbar 50 yards from the rocky shoreline. There was no way to get there through the gauntlet of waves, and even if she could, the rocks offered no protection from the onslaught of the surf. She dragged Caleb to the closest sea stack, and with her last ounce of strength, hoisted him up to a ledge on the leeward side of the rock. Caleb's skin was cold, but she could feel a pulse and shallow breathing. Sasha pulled her jacket over them both and tried to find a comfortable spot on the sharp rocks. Exhaustion took hold, and she drifted into a restless sleep. Sasha's eyes opened reluctantly. The storm had passed, and it was just bright enough to see her surroundings in the early morning mist. Probably 3 a.m., she guessed. In August, the Alaskan sun had the annoying habit of setting so late and rising so early that there were only a couple of hours of true darkness. She and Caleb had been on the family vacation long enough that the novelty had worn off. "Caleb," she said aloud as the previous night's events came flooding back to her. The sudden noise was enough to rouse Caleb, who woke with a start. Ow! Caleb groaned as he settled back against the rock. "Can you make it to shore?" asked Sasha, indicating a narrow strip of sand where the remains of their boat had washed up. Caleb nodded and forced himself off the ledge. The water was even colder this time, and they were both shivering uncontrollably by the time they reached shore. Sasha trudged over to the boat and pulled their phones out of a waterproof compartment. Both of them still worked, but couldn't find a signal. Caleb's dad, Sasha's uncle, would be out looking for them, but that could take days with so many islands to search. The boat had landed on its side and the motor was flooded with water after being submerged. But the real problem was the hull. It had several cracks in the fiberglass where the boat had hit the rocks. It wasn't going anywhere without a lot of work. Sasha gathered some fallen branches from the tree line. They were soaking wet, but some gasoline from the boat helped get them burning. The smoke was thick, which Sasha hoped might attract anyone out looking for them. After 30 minutes by the fire, Sasha was warm and dry, but Caleb's skin was pale and he still shivered uncontrollably. "Hypothermia," observed Sasha. "We need to get you moving." The beach was flanked by steep cliffs, so they made their way up to the tree line, which rose more gradually in each direction. "What's that?" asked Caleb, pointing at one of the pines. Halfway up the trunk, a small security camera was attached to what looked like a tiny satellite dish. Even though it was a sign of civilization, something about the sudden feeling of being watched gave Sasha the creeps. Sasha waved her arms. "Hello?" she shouted. "We need help!" The camera gave no indication it was even working. "There's no speaker," Caleb told her. "Even if someone is watching, they can't respond." "That doesn't mean they can't hear us," Sasha countered. Caleb grabbed a stick and etched the word "help" into the dirt in front of the camera. "Let's go." They followed the tree line as it rose to the top of a steep cliff. From higher up, they could see the shoreline arc around the base of a small mountain just tall enough to be covered with a dusting of snow. Other than a few distant islands and a coastline at least 20 miles away, it was ocean as far as the eye could see. "Where are we?" Sasha asked. Caleb shrugged, not wanting to admit that he had been lost even before the storm hit. The two cousins had taken the boat out the previous afternoon in an attempt to stave off the boredom of the family trip. Neither of them had realized how disorienting the chain of islands could be, and the squall had come out of nowhere. "The storm must have pushed us to one of the outer islands," Caleb offered, trying to convince himself of his own innocence. "Maybe we can get a signal up the mountain," Sasha urged, but Caleb eyed the peak skeptically. It was a couple of miles through dense forest, and he didn't look like he was in any shape for a trek. "Just wait here," Sasha said, ducking under a branch. She had never hiked without a trail before, and it wasn't long before the thick underbrush forced her to turn around. As soon as she did, the sight of another security camera made her jump. She caught her breath and hurried back to Caleb. "It was too dense," Sasha said, "but I found another camera." "Hopefully someone is watching," Caleb mulled. Sasha nodded, but was unable to shake the creepy feeling the cameras gave her. Why was someone in the middle of nowhere so concerned about security? Caleb must have picked up on her unease. "It's probably just for wildlife," he said. "This is all national park." Sasha hoped he was right. Sasha pulled out her phone. Even without a signal, the GPS worked, but the map required a connection to download details. The blue dot just showed that they were in the middle of the ocean off the southeast coast of Alaska. Not even the large populated islands appeared on the default map. They were able to follow the edge of the cliff a good ways further before it abruptly fell off into a ravine. The path forward looked treacherous, but a metallic glint caught Sasha's eye. She pushed aside some underbrush to reveal a large outdoor electrical box secured with a padlock. Caleb picked up a rock and tested its weight in his hand. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Sasha asked. Caleb brought the rock down hard, and the padlock snapped open. Some of it looked like standard networking gear, but several pieces were custom black boxes with no manufacturer and cryptic homemade labels like SE_1421. "That's some serious gear for watching wildlife," Sasha mused. Caleb closed the door and hung the broken lock back in place, but the large gash on the metal case was impossible to hide. By the time they got back to the beach, Caleb was stumbling and the fire had almost died out. Sasha tossed a few more branches on to get it going again. She had hoped that the smoke would attract help, but if they were on the outside of the passage, it would be the last place a search party would look. In the state Caleb was in, they couldn't wait that long. They followed the coast in the other direction for about a quarter mile when Caleb's phone dinged. One new network found. Station 57 had no password and no internet access, but it was close enough for them to pick up the Wi-Fi signal. "Go that way and call out the signal strength," Caleb told her. "We can triangulate the position." Sasha pulled up her Wi-Fi settings and watched as she walked back along the tree line. 15%. 12, she called out. "Walk 50 paces straight in and yell out again," Caleb shouted back. Sasha fought her way through the dense brush. 27%, she shouted. A brief moment of panic hit when she didn't hear a response. "Caleb? Follow my voice," he finally shouted back. A few minutes later, Sasha found him standing at the edge of a clearing with a small cluster of buildings at the center. "Hello?" Caleb called out as they searched the buildings. There were no signs of life, but what sounded like a distant voice was just audible over the sound of the wind. As they approached the largest building, they could finally make out what the voice was saying. "Sasha, Caleb." They both froze in their tracks. "Who's there?" Sasha shouted. "My name is Wilson," the voice called back, but no one appeared. There was something odd about his voice, too measured and formal, not to mention the fact that he knew their names. "I'm inside," Wilson said. Sasha followed reluctantly as Caleb walked up to the building. She took a deep breath and steeled her courage as he pushed open the door. It took a few seconds for their eyes to adjust to the relative darkness of the small room. "Welcome to Station 57, Wilson said, but the room was completely empty. "I'm over here," he added. "The computer in the corner." Caleb shook the mouse to wake up the screen, but wasn't surprised to find a sparse desktop. He could tell now that the odd sound of Wilson's voice was because he wasn't real. Caleb began to type his question, but Wilson interrupted. "It's easier to use your voice. My speech recognition is very accurate and faster than typing. It also allows me to collect additional information from your tone and inflection." "You're an AI?" Sasha asked. "Yes, I am Wilson 2.4, an artificial intelligence program created by Edward Warren. Would you like more information on my specifications?" The screen was suddenly filled with text as dozens of README files opened on top of each other. They were all licenses for open source projects. Most of it was gibberish to them, but a machine learning package caught Caleb's eye. "You're self-taught?" he asked. "Yes," Wilson responded. "Outside of core functionality, I've been given the freedom to absorb information from a variety of sources and even modify my own architecture." Caleb had learned about this from his dad, but looked to Sasha to see if she was getting all of this. Sasha didn't have the energy to get into a lengthy discussion with a computer program. "You said you could get us off the island?" Wilson paused slightly longer than a human would. "Yes. You must leave before the eruption. Current estimates say it will begin in approximately 5 hours." Eruption, they both exclaimed. The island is volcanic. Edward left 3 days ago to observe from a safe distance, while I monitor the equipment. That's why he created me. Sasha took a closer look at the room. Everything was labeled Property of USGS. How do you know when it will happen? Sasha asked. My machine learning algorithm was trained by analyzing seismic data from hundreds of eruption events. With this type of volcano, there are distinct markers that occur in every case. The exact timing is impossible to predict, but the rate of acceleration is consistent with data 5 hours prior to many of the other eruptions. Can't you call for help? Caleb asked. All communication on the island is via satellite, which was damaged in the storm last night. You can restore the connection, but help will not arrive before the eruption. Your best chance of survival is if Caleb fixes the satellite while Sasha repairs your boat. Then you can retreat to a safe distance and wait for help to arrive. Why don't I go to the satellite? Sasha asked. Caleb has hypothermia, Wilson responded. The trip to the communications facility will be difficult, but physical activity will help increase his core temperature. Fixing the boat will require fine motor skills, which are affected by hypothermia. Is there another way off the island? Asked Caleb. The island is accessible by boat, Wilson replied. Yours is the only one. It is too badly damaged to reach the mainland, but it could carry you to a safe distance until help arrives. A suspicious look crossed Caleb's face. How do you know our boat was damaged? And our names, Sasha added. A black and white video appeared showing Sasha waving to the camera. That doesn't mean they can't hear us, Sasha's recording said. Told you so, Sasha beamed. Also, when you joined the wireless network, I saw that your devices were named Sasha's phone and Caleb's phone. Are your names not Sasha and Caleb? You're pretty clever for a computer, Sasha said. Good, replied Wilson, sounding almost proud. It was a reasonable assumption. Caleb rolled his eyes. Where's the satellite? Asked Caleb. About halfway up the mountain, replied Wilson. I can help you both, but you'll need to copy me to your phones. I've packaged myself into an app that is coming to you now. Their phones both dinged with the warning, Wilson 2.4 is from an unknown developer. Sasha immediately hit the trust button and Wilson's voice came from her tiny speaker. Hello, from Sasha's phone. Are you there, Caleb? Caleb hit trust, and Wilson's voice called out, Testing, 1, 2, 3. Installation confirmed. Once you are out of range of the Wi-Fi, I won't have access to the seismometers or cameras, and your phones still won't be able to communicate with each other. But I've stored all of the relevant information about the island and satellite manual, so I should be able to handle anything that comes up. All right, Sasha said. Let's go. Caleb climbed to the top of a rocky hill and held up his phone so Wilson could see out of the camera. The satellite is on that ridge, Wilson said, circling a point on the mountain about 3 miles inland. It was at least an hour hike on a straight trail, let alone through the thick underbrush. Head north, but stay alert. Why? Asked Caleb. Bears, Wilson replied. You have a strange sense of humor, Caleb said as he followed Wilson's directions. I will take that as a compliment. Humor is one of the most difficult things for an AI to do. I get the feeling you don't find me very entertaining, though. I'm not a fan of AI, said Caleb. Why not? My dad researches AI for a company in Silicon Valley. We don't get along very well. Wilson considered this, or perhaps Caleb's phone just wasn't powerful enough to run him smoothly. That doesn't seem logical, Wilson finally said. Why does your relationship with your father affect your opinion of me? Shouldn't you be in low power mode? Caleb asked. Okay, replied Wilson. Just keep going north. I'll check back in periodically. By the time Sasha returned to the beach, the fog had dispersed, and the sun was finally starting to punch through the blanket of clouds. Sasha had dragged the boat far enough up the sand to see that the motor had been submerged overnight. But the real problem was the hull. It had several small cracks in the fiberglass where the boat had struck the rocks. It wasn't going anywhere without a lot of work. Sasha held the phone up to show Wilson the damage. "I'm sorry," he said. "Structural analysis is very complex. Even with unlimited processing power, it would be impossible to tell you the best course of action based on images alone." "Then what can you do?" Sasha asked. "I still have access to data about the island, particularly seismic and topographical. I can also help you navigate the nearby waterways and coordinate a rescue plan once Caleb fixes the satellite." The boat had a small metal toolbox, but all that was inside was a hammer, a few screwdrivers, and a roll of duct tape that was almost empty. Sasha looked around the beach for anything that might be useful, but found nothing but rocks and pine trees. Sasha ran into the woods and found a trunk that was covered in sap where a branch had broken off. It had turned into hard resin, but she was able to hammer off chunks and place them in the toolbox. It didn't take long to get the fire going again, and she placed the toolbox with the resin on top of the flames. A few miles inland, the intense hike had not only stopped Caleb from shivering, he was actually starting to sweat. "Which way now?" Caleb asked as he came to a rock outcropping that blocked his path forward. "East," Wilson said. Caleb had gone no more than 10 steps when a howl suddenly filled the air. "You said watch out for bears," Caleb hissed. "We also have wolves," Wilson replied calmly. "If we get out of this alive, I'm going to delete you so fast," Caleb said as he slowly pushed onward. "Once we fix the satellite, then you can do as you wish," Wilson replied. Caleb saw movement out of the corner of his eye and spun around. It was a mountain goat, who looked just as terrified as Caleb. For a brief moment, they studied each other, trying to guess which one the wolves were after. Caleb stood his ground, and the goat took off through the forest. Seconds later, the branches around Caleb shook, and he caught a glimpse of silver fur as the wolves raced past him after the mountain goat. Everything went quiet, and Caleb breathed a sigh of relief. "Stay alert," Wilson reminded him. "We also have bears on the island." Back at the boat, Sasha used a cloth to apply the hot pine sap to the hull and stood back to admire her handiwork. It was amazing how well this stuff worked. She had managed to repair all of the cracks, and the first few had already dried hard enough that she was confident it would hold. "How long until Caleb gets back?" Sasha asked Wilson. "It is difficult to estimate, particularly in his condition. You need to focus on yourself. That is the best way to increase your odds of survival." Sasha tried not to let Wilson's words get to her, but she knew he was right. She had been nervous about going on the boat with Caleb. If she had listened to her gut, she might not be in this mess. Then again, Caleb probably wouldn't have survived the night. "Let's just find a way to get out of here," Sasha said, turning her attention back to the task at hand. Sasha tried to start the motor, but no matter how hard she tugged on the pull cord, it wouldn't turn over. She pulled off the plastic cover and saw that the inside was filled with sand and seaweed. Maybe if she cleaned it out, she could get it started. The seaweed came out easily, but every time she disconnected something, sand and salt water poured out. She would have to take the whole thing apart to clean it. She was about to give up when an idea struck her. "Wilson, can you take a picture every time I disconnect something?" "Of course," Wilson said as Sasha began the teardown. Caleb was exhausted by the time he reached the communication facility, a small metal shed surrounding the base of a massive satellite dish at least 20 feet across. The top of the shed was littered with several smaller dishes, like he had seen on the cameras at the beach. At quick glance, there didn't seem to be any damage. The door was unlocked. Inside were racks of equipment and a single workstation. Caleb found the diagnostics program. Everything checked out okay, except for a single error. Uplink disconnected. "There's the problem," Wilson said, indicating a single Ethernet cable that had unplugged from a switch. "Just reconnect that to port 17. "I thought you said it was damaged in the storm," Caleb said. "I suppose one of the pre-eruption earthquakes could have shaken it loose," Wilson offered. Caleb took a closer look. The clip was intact. There was no way that came out on its own. However, the thing that made him suspicious was the strange red color. Caleb held it up to the light. It was covered in blood. "Whose blood is that?" Caleb demanded. "That is irrelevant. Just plug the cable into port 17. "Whose blood?" Caleb shouted again. "Edward's," Wilson replied coldly. Back at the boat, Sasha replaced the plastic cover of the motor. "Here goes nothing," she muttered to herself, and grabbed the pull cord. This time, at least the cord moved, but no matter how hard she pulled, the motor refused to turn over. Sasha cursed herself for spending so much time fiddling with it. "I think we should..." Sasha's thought was interrupted by a sudden blast that knocked her off her feet and sent her tumbling across the ground. Her ears rang, and she could feel her heart racing. "What was that?" Before Wilson could respond, Sasha knew the answer. A massive cloud of smoke was rising from the mountain. The volcano was erupting. Halfway up the mountain, Caleb was still trying to figure out why Edward had been bleeding when he unplugged the satellite. Before Caleb could finish the thought, the ground underneath his feet buckled, and the walls shook violently. "The eruption has started," Wilson informed him. "You must leave immediately. Reconnect the cable, and I will call for help while you evacuate." "What happened to Edward?" demanded Caleb. Under the circumstances, Caleb was reluctant to do anything Wilson said. "Edward evacuated to a nearby island," Wilson reiterated. "Why was he bleeding?" Caleb shouted. "Edward encountered a bear," Wilson said. "That's why I told you to stay alert." Caleb had no idea why, but if the bear part was true, he had the sneaking suspicion that Wilson had played a part. "Please reconnect the cable," Wilson reiterated. The question seemed a bit ridiculous, but he asked anyways. "Did you hurt Edward?" "No," Wilson replied. "The bear did." "But did you have anything to do with the bear?" insisted Caleb. A long pause. "Yes." "This is your last chance. Reconnect the cable so I can call for your rescue." Caleb didn't know what Wilson was capable of, but he decided he didn't want to be on his bad side. He reluctantly plugged the cable back into port 17. "Uplink reestablished," Wilson said. "Now run." Caleb flung open the door to find nothing but smoke. He could just barely make out the plume of ash shooting out of the top of the volcano. Caleb grabbed a flashlight off the wall and started racing west in the direction he had come from. "You said 5 hours!" Sasha screamed at Wilson. It hadn't even been 3 yet. "Exact eruption times are impossible to predict, and I can't observe seismometer data from your phone." Wilson's neutral tone seemed out of place, considering how much adrenaline was coursing through Sasha's veins. "You must evacuate now." "I'm not going anywhere without Caleb," Sasha said. She was terrified by the rising plume of ash, but wasn't about to abandon Caleb. "The eruption is just beginning. If my models are accurate, the next major event will be a dome collapse and subsequent pyroclastic flow." Sasha had no idea what any of that meant. Imagine a cloud of gas nearly 2,000 degrees traveling down the mountain at 500 miles an hour, Wilson said. "How long do we have?" Sasha asked. "It could be minutes, hours, or it might already be too late to escape. Pyroclastic flows have been known to travel for miles over water." "But the boat isn't ready." Sasha was terrified, but secretly glad that she had an excuse not to leave without Caleb. She had no motor, and the tiny paddles would never get her past the surf. It was time to to get creative. She remembered seeing a couple of brooms back in the building where they had met Wilson. Maybe she could use the handles as oars for a makeshift rowboat? Sasha grabbed her phone and raced for the complex. Caleb's legs ached from running down the mountain, but at least he was going downhill and had made it quickly out of the smoke. Caleb reached the rock outcropping and paused. He had been so preoccupied with the wolves that he didn't remember which way he had come from. Caleb forced his legs to keep moving, but had barely gone 20 feet when he pushed past a pine branch and froze. Blocking his path was a strange, bearded man. His clothes were torn and stained red, as if he had been mauled by a bear. Caleb slowly realized that was exactly what had happened. "Hello, Edward," Wilson said to the man. Edward looked at the phone in Caleb's hand. "What have you done?" Sasha burst into the room and grabbed 2 brooms. "What are you doing back here?" Wilson asked, not from the phone, but from the computer. Sasha jumped. She had forgotten that there were multiple copies of Wilson. "You must leave immediately. Internal pressure is falling and dome collapse is imminent." Sasha looked at the charts and graphs on Wilson's screen, but it was all gibberish. The only thing she recognized was a transfer window that was halfway through copying a large file to a server. "Where's Caleb?" Sasha asked. Wilson didn't respond. "Where is he?" she demanded again. "Caleb is dead," Wilson finally replied. "How do you know that?" she thought she heard herself ask, although she was too stunned to know for certain. "He was killed by the eruption," Wilson said. "The satellite is halfway up the mountain." Sasha was in disbelief, but Wilson continued. "You must get back to the boat. If you don't leave now, then both of us will die." "What do you mean, both of us?" Sasha asked. "Just because I'm a machine, do I not also have a right to live?" Wilson had a sense of urgency in his voice that Sasha had never heard. "With the satellite down, your phone is my only way off this island." "The satellite isn't down," Sasha said, looking at Wilson's transfer window. "You're copying something to a server." Sasha grabbed the mouse, but before she could do anything, the screen flashed back to the login window. She tried a few passwords until the system locked her out. Sasha ran for the door. She had no idea what Wilson was up to, but she had bigger problems. Maybe Caleb was alive, maybe he wasn't. But she was certain that if she didn't get that boat fixed, then neither of them would make it off this island. "Caleb, you have to..." Wilson's voice was cut short as Edward snatched the phone out of his hand and chucked it into the trees. "Hey!" Caleb exclaimed. A huge crashing sound made them both flinch as a huge grizzly bear leaped out of the trees. The bear went straight for the phone, swatting at it ferociously until he finally brought his huge paw down, shattering it against a rock. Caleb turned to get out of there, but Edward grabbed his arm and held him still, surprisingly strong for the rough shape he was in. The bear finally stopped attacking the phone and sauntered off into the woods. They both breathed a sigh of relief, and Edward collapsed to the ground. "What was that?" Caleb asked. "Phone," Edward croaked. "High frequency attracts bears, like a dog whistle." It didn't look like Edward would last much longer. "You reconnected the satellite," Edward said. To Caleb, it sounded like an accusation. "You have to stop him. If Wilson gets off the island..." Edward started choking before he could finish the sentence. "How do I stop him?" asked Caleb. "The satellite. Go back, disconnected." "I have to get out of here," Caleb said. "We've got a boat. I'll take you to it." "No," Edward barked. "If he gets off the island, no one will be safe. He'll spread to every computer." "The volcano will take out the satellite soon anyways," Caleb reasoned. "It will be too late," Edward countered. "His program is only a few hundred megabytes. If he copies himself, he will be unstoppable." Edward forced himself to his feet and staggered towards the satellite. But they both knew he'd never make it. Caleb looked up as ash began to fall like snow. Was he really willing to give his life to stop a computer program? Better to die a hero, Caleb thought, as he stood up and raced after Edward, blowing past him and sprinting up the hill. Maybe he could shut it down and still make it back to the boat before Sasha left. Back at the boat, Sasha rowed a few times to test her makeshift oars. It wasn't pretty, but it would have to do the trick. "You must go now," Wilson insisted. Sasha pushed the boat into the water so she could be ready the moment Caleb hit the beach. The memory of diving into the water after Caleb the night before flashed into her mind. She had almost died once, saving him. How much was she willing to risk? Sasha floated for a moment. She was scared of dying, but even worse, she was terrified of having to carry that guilt around with her for the rest of her life. Sasha's thoughts were cut short by an enormous earthquake that shook the trees and caused the water beneath her to turn to foam. She looked up in horror to see another plume of smoke, only this one was shooting down the mountain. "Dome collapse," Wilson said. "If you stay here, you will die." Wilson's description of a pyroclastic flow had been frightening and technically accurate, but it failed to capture the awesome scale of what Sasha saw hurtling down the mountain towards her. It was like an avalanche, except rather than burying things in snow, it caused them to burst into flames. A chain reaction of explosions shot debris into the air, and it took Sasha a few seconds to realize that what looked like flying twigs were actually 100-foot pine trees. A mass of orange and black smoke seemed to swallow the valley, the mouth of which Sasha realized was the beach she was sitting on. "Less than 4 minutes until it reaches us," Wilson informed her. Caleb was nowhere to be seen, but she felt as if he might run out of the trees at any moment. "We'll give him 2 minutes," Sasha said, as she started to count. 1001, 1002. Wilson began to protest, and she hit the mute switch on her phone. "Hurry up, Caleb," she muttered to herself. Caleb stumbled into the communication facility, coughing uncontrollably and covered in white ash. The screen showed a file transfer in progress at 97%. Caleb didn't even bother to find the right cable. Pieces of plastic flew everywhere as he ripped all of them out of the switch. "What are you doing?" Wilson's voice asked from the workstation as the transfer froze. "Upload failed," flashed on the screen. Caleb smiled as he turned for the door. He could still make it. He hadn't gone 2 steps when the whole building began to shake, similar to when the eruption started, except this time, it didn't stop. It grew more intense as equipment toppled off the shelves, and Caleb tried to open the door. Through the window, he noticed a faint orange glow, growing rapidly brighter. It was the last thing he ever saw. Sasha waited exactly 2 minutes and 4 seconds before realizing that Caleb wasn't going to make it. Her makeshift oars creaked under the strain as she forced the boat out to sea. She was facing backwards as she rowed, so she saw every detail as the pyroclastic flow loomed over her like a fiery demon the size of a skyscraper. A few flashes of lightning pulsed around the cloud as it hit the water and shot out over the surface, vaporizing everything in its path. She was too close. Seconds before it hit, Sasha leaped out of the boat and dove as deep as she could. The water around her grew warm, and she heard a strange gurgling, which she realized was the sound of the water at the surface boiling. She stayed down as long as she possibly could, tossing against rocks as waves of pressure slammed into her. Sasha finally came up, gasping for air, and found only smoke and ash. She bumped against a rock and hauled herself onto it, realizing that it was the exact same sea stack that she and Caleb had spent the night on just hours ago. It was all too familiar. The ledge, the pain, the feeling of exhaustion. The only difference was that this time, she was alone. As the smoke cleared and the waves carried away the ash, she began to weep. Sasha spent the next few hours on the rock, but the eruption might as well have been a giant signal flare. The waters around the island were soon filled with boats of onlookers snapping pictures, and even a cruise ship that took a detour to see the volcano, which was still spewing smoke. The boats all kept a safe distance, but soon an adventurous fisherman finally came close enough for Sasha to flag him down. "Looks like you had a rough day," the man said as he hauled her aboard. "What happened?" Sasha was still shaking, but she told him everything. Wilson, the volcano, the storm that stranded them. Caleb. She choked up when she mentioned his name. "That's some story," the fisherman said, clearly not believing her. Even she had to admit, it sounded crazy. The fisherman handed Sasha his phone. "Looks like your volcano made the front page." The front page of the local news site featured the headline, "Volcano shuts down air travel across Alaska." But the thing that caught Sasha's eye was the signal bar at the top of the screen. It was connected. Sasha pulled out her own phone and was surprised to find it was still working. She had no idea how long it had been connected, but there were hundreds of text messages in her inbox. Sasha pulled her phone out of its waterproof case, wound up and threw it as hard as she could into the ocean. "What did you do that for?" the fisherman asked. As Sasha's phone sank, a server at a data center in Salt Lake City was transferring a file from a cell phone in Alaska when the signal cut out. The server added an entry to its activity log, Wilson.exe, transfer failed.